The school stage smelled of old dust and varnish. For Elias, every speck of dust dancing in the spotlight was a distraction. The lights themselves were the worst. They weren't just hot, they were a physical pressure, a weight on his shoulders, forcing his eyes to close. He could feel the rough synthetic fabric of his shirt collar rubbing against his neck, each fiber a tiny scratch. The microphone in front of him emitted a high-pitched, constant buzz at 60 hertz, a dissonant note that clashed with the lower hum of the auditorium's fluorescent lights, creating a painful interference in his head. He opened his mouth to begin his presentation, but the path between thought and speech seemed like an insurmountable chasm. The words were there, but they refused to make the crossing. On the giant screen behind him, his masterpiece pulsed silently, a map of the city, alive, with veins of colored light moving in complex patterns. It was beautiful, it was logical, and no one understood it. Silence in the audience stretched out, becoming heavy and hostile. Then, like glass breaking, a laugh echoed from the back. "Did he freeze up?" shouted a voice he recognized as Marcus. The first laugh opened the floodgates. Soon, there were dozens of whispers and giggles. "It's that weird map again. I think it's from that game he plays all day. My dad says people like that don't amount to anything in life. What a loser. Poor guy." The word loser hurt the most. It cut through the buzzing and the heat and hit him right in the chest. He stopped trying to speak. All he could do was stare at the blinding light as the sound of mockery surrounded him. "Where in the world are you joining us today? Think about the last time you created something that was a pure extension of who you are. It could have been a drawing, a poem, a plate of food, a well-organized spreadsheet. Now imagine presenting that little piece of your soul to the world, only to be met with derision. Feel the chill down your spine, the desire to become invisible. Stay with us, because the project that was drowned in laughter on that stage was about to be rescued by the biggest megaphone on the planet, and the company that found it not only silenced the critics, but offered Elias an infinitely larger stage. Sign up, because this is a story that proves that the standards the world ignores are often the ones that move it. Hidden in the dark aisle of the stage, Nina felt every laugh like a punch in her own stomach. The anger that consumed her was so intense that it made her tremble. She wanted to storm the stage, grab the microphone from her brother's trembling hand, and scream at them all. To scream that this wasn't a video game map, it was a living portrait of their city. That Elias wasn't useless, he was the smartest person she knew. But she stood there, paralyzed by the futility of the situation. She remembered vividly the night he showed her the first working version of the map. He called her into his room, not with words but with a gentle tap on her elbow. On the screen, dots of light moved. "Those are the buses," he whispered, and in his voice there was an almost religious reverence. Nina, who was in her first year of architecture school, understood immediately. She saw buildings and streets. He saw the systems that brought them to life. This was Elias's language. He didn't know how to ask, "Did you get home okay?" But he would send her a link to a private version of his map that tracked her bus in real time, with a small green dot flashing, so she would know he was watching over her from afar. When their grandfather, a heavy smoker with emphysema, had an attack, Elias went a week without sleep, cross-referencing data from the Environmental Protection Agency with the city's wind patterns to create an alert system. His grandfather's cell phone now beeped with a simple message: "Bad air today. Stay home." And "I love you" translated into code and data. But Nina's outburst was also directed at herself. She remembered her own frustration years ago, the parties she missed because Elias had a sensory crisis, the shame she felt when he had a meltdown at the supermarket. There was a time when part of her wished he could be normal, because her life would be easier. The guilt of that thought gnawed at her. It took her years to learn his language, to stop trying to teach him hers, and start listening to what he had to say in his. And now that she was fluent, the rest of the world seemed like a barbaric, ignorant tribe, laughing at a poet because they didn't understand his meter. Her treasure was being treated like trash, and the helplessness of not being able to protect him was her greatest pain. The family's journey to understand Elias was a long detour down the wrong paths. When he was little, the first psychologist they consulted, Dr. Vogel, said he had attention deficit disorder. Her solution? Less computer time and more outdoor activities. They tried. They took Elias to parks, on hikes. The result was an anxious, overwhelmed boy who spent all his time trying to find patterns in the leaves on trees or the shapes of clouds, completely ignoring the activity itself. The hope that fresh air would cure him faded. Then came the social skills therapy phase. A group of children sat in a circle, forced by a well-meaning therapist, Mr. Davies, to practice conversations. The exercise of the day was to ask a classmate, "How was your weekend?" When it was Elias's turn, instead of answering, he began to explain the statistical probability of rain based on data from the last 10 years for that same weekend. The therapist interrupted him, saying that this was not the expected answer. The therapy was meant to teach him to connect with others, but it only made him feel more inadequate, as if his brain were operating in the wrong language. The school also offered its share of false hope. An educational coordinator suggested that Elias's interest in data was an escape from reality, and that he should be encouraged to participate in group activities, such as the theater club or student council. They wanted him to fit the mold of the participative student. Each of these attempts was based on the premise that the way Elias saw the world was a problem to be fixed, not a strength to be nurtured. They didn't want to understand him, they wanted to change him. The pain this caused was that of feeling constantly broken, and the hope of finding someone who appreciated his unique operating system was replaced by a quiet resignation. Marcus, the self-proclaimed king of the school hallway, didn't hate Elias. He didn't even know him. What Marcus hated was what Elias represented, a form of intelligence he couldn't master or understand. Marcus's father was a former athlete who measured his son's worth in goals and trophies. Marcus was good at sports and popular, but he felt deeply insecure about his own intelligence. Elias, with his silence and intense focus on something that seemed straight out of a science fiction movie, was a mirror that reflected Marcus's own inadequacies. Mocking Elias was a way to break that mirror, an act of self-preservation to maintain his fragile status at the top of the school's social hierarchy. The other students, like Pilot Fish, just followed the shark, laughing to ensure they didn't become the next prey. The teacher in charge, Ms. Blanchard, was a woman on the verge of exhaustion. She taught history and had little or no affinity for technology. She saw Elias's project as confusing and outside the scope of the subject. When the laughter began, she was paralyzed. She didn't know how to defend a project she didn't understand herself. Her intervention was weak. "Class, please be quiet. Let's give Elias a chance." But her voice lacked conviction. In her failure to control the room and protect her student, she became an accomplice to the humiliation. Not out of malice, but out of incompetence and being overwhelmed by a system that left her without tools. At home, the tension was palpable. That night, the argument between Stefan and Helene was more intense. "I told you, Helene," said Stefan, his voice heavy with pain and anger. "I told you this would happen. The world isn't a computer lab. He needs to learn to defend himself, to be tougher." Stefan grew up in a family where practicality was everything. He loved his son, but his love translated into a terrifying fear that Elias would not survive in the real world. "He doesn't need to be tougher, Stefan," Helene retorted, her eyes flashing. "The world needs to be kinder. Our job is not to change him, it's to change the world for him." Nina listened to everything from her room, her heart torn. She understood her brother's genius, but she also saw the validity of her father's concerns. And she, caught in the middle, felt the weight of both truths. After the disaster of the presentation, Elias did what he always did when the world became unbearable. He took refuge in his code. He spent the entire weekend locked in his room, not out of sadness, but out of necessity. The map was his only consolation, the only place where the rules were clear, and the result was directly proportional to effort and logic. He decided he would never show it to anyone again. It would be his secret, his private universe. The project, however, was growing exponentially. With the new layers of data, he added his once powerful laptop began to falter. Rendering the map in real time required processing power that he didn't have. The RAM was always at its limit, and crashes were constant. Frustrated, he started researching solutions on developer forums. That's when he found a post talking about Google Collaboratory, a tool that allowed you to run Python code directly on Google's servers. The act that would change his life was not grand. It was purely functional. He created an account, uploaded, gigabytes of data and his script of thousands of lines. When saving, the platform asked about visibility, private or public. He chose public, not out of a desire to share, but because the private option required a few extra authentication steps that he didn't have the patience to set up. He named the project literally Urban Data Symphony. Then he copied the link and posted it in the darkest corner of a programmer forum with a simple question: does anyone know how to optimize real-time GeoJSON rendering with this library? He didn't know, but his digital bottle had just been found. On the other side of the world, in Mountain View, California, a senior software engineer at Google named Dr. Kenji Tanaka, while investigating a rare bug that was causing spikes in GPU usage on the servers, came across a link that was generating an alert. Curious, he clicked on it, and what he saw made him spill his coffee on his desk. The Urban Data Symphony was composed note by note, victory by victory. The first note was pure stubbornness. Bothered by the fact that the city's bus app only showed scheduled times and not the actual location, Elias decided he could do better. He spent an entire month learning about web scraping and APIs, a frustrating process of trial and error. Victory came at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, when a torrent of numbers and letters, coordinates, times, route numbers, finally appeared on his black screen. He didn't celebrate. He just felt the quiet satisfaction of order being extracted from chaos. The second victory was visualization. Raw numbers were one thing, but he wanted to see the pattern. He dove into the world of graphics programming libraries. His first success was modest, a single static blue dot on a blank map of the city. He called Nina, who was studying for a test. "It's the 71 bus," he said. Nina looked at the dot, then at her brother's serious, concentrated face, and smiled. "It's beautiful, Eli." Her compliment, which connected his logic to aesthetics, was a crucial moment. From then on, the project took on a life of its own. He added all the buses, each with its own route color. Then he integrated real-time weather data. The map now showed small rain clouds moving across it, and the bus routes affected by them changed color to yellow. The most exciting victory came when he implemented a machine learning algorithm. He fed the system with traffic data from the past 5 years. One afternoon, while they were having a snack, Elias's map started flashing red on a major avenue. "There's going to be a big traffic jam there in 20 minutes, he said. 15 minutes later, the local news radio announced an accident involving 3 cars, exactly where his map had predicted. Nina looked at him speechless. It was no longer a map. It was a crystal ball. Watching Elias work with renewed intensity after the school incident, Nina underwent her own transformation. She saw his dedication no longer as an escape, but as a form of protest. He wasn't hiding from the world. He was building a better one. And in doing so, he was changing her. She began to see patterns everywhere. In her architecture projects, she began to think not only about the design of the building but about the flow of people who would inhabit it, a direct echo of Elias's work. In art history classes, she began to analyze not only the painting, but the frequency with which the artist used certain colors or brushstrokes, looking for the creator's signature. Elias's language was giving her a new layer of perception about her own world. One night she walked into his room and found him asleep on his keyboard, the computer screen illuminating his face with the gentle dance of data. She felt a wave of love and remorse. She remembered all the times she had rushed him, rolled her eyes at his detailed explanations, wished he would just keep it simple. Carefully, she covered him with a blanket and sat down beside him, just watching the map. In that moment, she understood that protecting Elias didn't mean building a wall around him. It meant giving him the tools and confidence to build bridges. His decision to upload the project, which had initially frightened her, now seemed like the bravest thing she had ever seen him do. He wasn't asking for approval. He was simply sharing his work on his own terms, and she felt immensely proud. Ms. Blanchard's history class on the Industrial Revolution was proceeding at a sleepy pace. Suddenly, a student's cell phone in the front row vibrated. She looked at the screen and her eyes widened. She quickly passed the phone to the classmate next to her. In less than a minute, a wave of whispering and flashing cell phones spread through the room like wildfire. Mrs. Blanchard, losing her patience, slammed her book down on the desk. What could be so important to interrupt the rise of the proletariat? Marcus, the bully who was at the back of the room, raised his hand. something he rarely did. His expression was not one of mockery, but of pure shock. "Teacher," he said, his voice strangely subdued, "it's about Elias. You need to see the Google blog." Chaos ensued. Someone projected their cell phone screen onto the classroom screen, the same screen where Elias had been humiliated days earlier. Now it displayed the clean, official layout of Google's artificial intelligence blog. The headline was impossible to ignore. "The symphony hidden in our daily commutes. How a young developer created one of the most impressive data visualizations of the year." The article, written by a leading Google engineer, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, described how he found the project and how it demonstrated an intuitive understanding of data science and machine learning that we rarely see, even in PhD candidates. He praised the code as brutally efficient and the visualization as a work of informational art. The post ended with a bombshell. "We don't know who created urban data symphony, but if you're reading this, know that there's a desk and a job waiting for you at Google Maps. We'd like to invite you, all expenses paid, to present your work here in Mountain View." Nina arrived at the door of the room at that exact moment, drawn by the noise. She saw the blog on the big screen, saw Marcus's astonished face, Mrs. Blanchard's jaw dropping. She saw all eyes turning to her brother. Elias, oblivious to everything, was drawing a complex pattern in his notebook. Nina walked over to him, her heart pounding, and turned her laptop toward him, showing him the article. He read the headline. He read his project name. He read the word genius. He didn't react in a big way. He just looked up from the laptop and looked at Nina. A small, almost imperceptible smile formed at the corner of his mouth. It was enough. It was everything. His symphony had finally found its orchestra. In a noisy world, the deepest truths are often found in silent patterns. Genius is not about conforming, but about having the courage to show the world a new way of seeing. If this story has made you believe in the power of hidden talents and the beauty of data, show your support. Like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Share this story, because somewhere near you a brilliant mind may be translating chaos into music, just waiting for someone to turn up the volume.